in the den of iniquity. Vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment. What a pity. Tomorrow never certain. What draws behind the curtain? The face of evil smirking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble. Let the dozers gather rubble from LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso. Cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest and the righteous in your corners.
Hello, welcome ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ike. Let's get one thing out of the way. Go ahead and click that like button. Click the subscribe button if you have not already. Click the subscribe button twice, as a matter of fact. Okay? Hit the bell. Hit the bell twice. My name is Ike. This is my channel. Over here we talk about being better and doing better. The know-how and the actions required for mastery. Is it not? And you know, today we're talking about failure. We're talking about failure modes. What is a failure mode? A failure mode is a phrase that I'm borrowing from engineering, and it has to do with how something breaks, how something fails, how something ceases to function. Okay? How it goes wrong, right? We know of one very popular failure mode. We know the weakest link, right? We talk about the chain all the time and the weakest link in the chain. Okay? A chain under tension. The weakest link will be that place where the rupture will happen. The failure mode of the chain will be the rupture of the weakest link in tension. But we're gonna understand how we can predict and design our lives around the knowledge of our modes of failure. How do we come to step on our wieners and fumble the ball and not perform at the level that we should, not keep the promises to ourselves that we make, not deliver on our diet, our exercise regimen, on some plan to execute some aspect of our business that we haven't done. These failures, and they're numerous, they too have their modalities, the shapes that they take, the forms that they take. There is a weakest link. There is a point. Okay? How would we know that? And ladies and gentlemen, we're going on a stream of consciousness today. Maybe we'll call it Misc Fridays. And in this stream of consciousness, we're concentrating on the idea of your weakest link and how it manifests itself in various endeavors. Knowing it and understanding how to mitigate its bad effects. Okay. So goes the story, so goes the promise, so goes the thesis or hypothesis here. But we are going to start from a place that's comfortable for all of us, I guess, which is back to the whole idea of the phrase failure mode. Okay? Back to the whole idea of the phrase failure mode. And let me see if I can share my screen here so we can kind of visualize something together. Perhaps. And I believe that can be seen. Yes. that indeed can be seen. So I was saying that failure modes is a phrase that I'm borrowing from engineering and it has to do with how something breaks. Okay. So I'm going to draw a few things here. And if you're not seeing the screen, well, you can imagine with us. We already talked about the chain and the weakest link, but let's say we're talking about a shelf, for example, right? You got some shelving in your room. All right. You got some cheap plywood shelving in your room, and it's got some kind of bracket here that's connected to the wall, right? And then you got your little plywood deal like this, and then you got another bracket on this side. So let's say we make the brackets like this, right? And it's got some screws that go into the wall as well. And then we're asking, well, what is the failure mode of this particular shelf, and why is it important to know the failure mode of this particular shelf? Well, okay, we say the shelf can take 200 pounds. What does it mean? What are the possible ways in which the shelf can fail? Well, the plywood could go, right? Let's call this plywood, which is just basically the surface. We have this bracket here. This bracket could buckle, right? The screws on the wall could pull out. So we've at least seen three things that could happen if we put our 200 pounds, okay, on this shelf. And if we know what's going to fail first, which we will know if we indeed know the screw and know the bracket and know the wood, right? Then we can predict certain things. We can mitigate against certain things. And from a standpoint of design, it is very important to be looking at your weak spots. That's the initial point that I'm trying to bring to the table here. I'm trying to make sure that it's clear because it's often said that you should not be focusing on your weaknesses, right? It is often said that you should focus on your strength, which is something that is true. It is true. Focus on your strengths. However, that was when it comes to execution. But when it comes to design and when it comes to understanding of the machinery, understanding of this shelf no, means you know that the screws are the weakest link. Okay. That's what really understanding the shelf means. Now, the shelf can say, hey, I'm going to focus on my strong points. I have this nice glue laminated timber surface finish here on this plywood. Okay. But if I don't remember that if I put more than 200 pounds on this thing, the screws are going to go, then I'm not going to realize that maybe I should add one more bracket here in the middle or something like that. So goes our lives, right? I was thinking about this with regards to, well, what are my failure modes? Now, there are many weaknesses, many weak points along which you can fail, many things that are analogous to the screw here. Well, let's say we had a table, some kind of tabletop thing, right? Is it the columns that are going to buckle first, right? Is it the connection between the beams and the columns, right? And to not know what's going to happen first, how the table is going to fail, is not acceptable in the world of designing tables, furniture, spoons, whatever it may be. It's not acceptable. And that's the thing you always focus on. You're constantly looking at the weakness of that screw. You're constantly looking at the weakness of that particular connection. That's the thing you're trying to protect, you're trying to guard against, you're trying to watch out for. But a lot of times we find out, well, I, anyways, find out that a lot of our weaknesses we're not very aware of. We don't know how it happens. We don't know how time and time again the screw comes loose from the wall. The screw is the failure mode, the weakest link. That's how this shelf is going to fail. We keep having the same kinds of patterns, right? we keep having the same kind of patterns. And it just behooves us to know where that screw is and that weakest link is. It's not going to go away. Is that the point? Okay. And again, some people may say, well, why are you focusing on your weaknesses per se? But the idea that in the world of design, you cannot accept some machinery, some car from somebody, and they don't know exactly how it breaks. Why do you do crash tests, for example? Because you're going to know in theory, but also you're going to test things in practice to know how they break, how they fail, how they malfunction. So how do you malfunction all the time? And when you're looking at it from the standpoint of a designer, it is an uncritical look because you're not mad that a structure has a failure mode. It, by definition, must have one. You're not angry at the fact that the way the shelf fails is that the screws pull out of the studs in your wall. That is the failure mode. That's what's going to happen. That's the weakest link. Watch out for those screws. It is because of the screws that we cannot put more than 200 pounds on that thing. The plywood is not going to give. The brackets are not going to give. It's the screws. You're not mad at the screws. You just know that this is the failure mode of that shelf. You know that the legs are the failure mode of this particular table. The legs are going to buckle. That's the first thing to give. So I have paid attention to one of my particular failure modes, which is a tendency to become overly critical and I'm overly sensitive to my high standards in certain regards. And then that leads to problems. So before I start something, I'm already looking how will my failure modes or how will my particular weaknesses, how will my weak spots manifest themselves? Okay. Or if you just take one weak spot, maybe yours is procrastination. Okay. How is procrastination going to manifest itself in this particular thing that trying to do? And it's not just a question of noting somewhere, oh, well, I procrastinate. But what exactly does procrastination feel like? Because it's not enough to just say, oh, well, there is some kind of a failure mode. It's like, but no, you got to know at 200 pounds, the tension on the screw due to the torque becomes too much and it pulls out of the wall. So the same thing for you, you got to know what exactly is it that starts happening in your head and what exactly is it that you start feeling in your body so that you can recognize that failure mode is engaging, it is taking place. The typical pattern is happening again. The screw is pulling out of the wall. Does this make sense? You got a one in the chat if this idea basically that a failure mode is a way in which things break, and we all have our ways in which we break, not just mechanical things. And that from a design standpoint, it is very important to focus on your weaknesses. It is actually the only thing that you're generally looking for. That's what you're looking for. How is this thing going to break? However, we find that in our lives, because we're trying not to focus on the negatives, we become delusional out of fear and other things. We become delusional about having a weak spot, having a failure mode. It's like having a shelf that you've designed and you're just ignoring how much load you can actually put on it. You're ignoring how you're attaching it to the wall. You're ignoring what's going to come apart first. You have a chain and you're ignoring that one of the links is made with clay or something. You're just ignoring that part. That is not a good thing. However, the idea or the ability to look at your failure modes requires some skill. So I had an experience today actually of that problem, and I was able to foresee it. What problem? I'm saying that one of my failure modes is that I can get overly critical about standards such that maybe I may not mentor somebody properly because of it. I may not um, engage with others well because of it. I may stress myself out by being quasi perfectionist because of it. I'm far from a perfectionist. So that's not what I mean. I'm not a perfectionist at all. But I have certain standards when it comes to work, delivery, and certain other kinds of things. And then I tend to be hypersensitive to those standards. And then as a result, I sabotage myself. That's just one failure mode, okay? That's one thing that I know will happen. So when I go into a particular task, okay, I'm going to start a staff augmentation business soon. So when I go in there, I know, because let me tell you what staff augmentation is. Staff augmentation is basically, you are getting help, okay? You're getting employees and you're loaning them out to government agencies, mainly, or to certain big private agencies that are working in government contracts, and these people need to be able to bring people in and take them out. So basically, staff augmentation. Now I know that I'm going to be disappointed with the certain people there, and I know that my blood pressure is going to flare up in at certain times because of certain initiative or lack thereof or whatever. But the point is, I want to not only know that that is my failure mode, but I want to know how it actually is in real time. What does procrastination feel like in your body in real time? What exactly does it feel like to be overly sensitive about having standards or to be prideful? Maybe pride is your weak spot, right? What exactly does it feel like? Because when you can observe it and you can recognize it, and then you can be like, oh, the screws are pulling off the wall. Okay. And if I act based on screws pulling off the wall, this is the failure mode of mine, which so I'm gonna need to re-engage. I'm gonna need to add another bracket here on this shelf. I'm gonna need to reevaluate the situation somehow. Now, if I may again ask for another one, don't we recognize that we do indeed have patterns insofar as we have an identity, we have a character, we do have patterns in which the failures happen, right? If it's procrastination, you see yourself procrastinating yet again. It's not like something that just constantly sneaks up on you or that you notice in hindsight. You can sometimes watch yourself fall into your failure mode trap, see the weakest link crumble, see the thing break right in front of you. Ain't that right? Ain't that right, big drama bear? And what I'm saying is that there's a lot of power in being able to understand and recognize and see that thing. Simply see, simply observe, simply perceive. That's all we're talking about here. We're not talking about dissecting with a knife. We're not talking about dissecting with equations. We're talking about feeling what your frailties are, becoming very, very familiar with what your weaknesses feel like. Like when you start getting overly prideful or agitated about something, what exactly does that feel like? It something takes over your body. What does it feel like when something takes over your body? What is the temperature of your does the temperature go up? Does it go down? Does your heart rate go up? Can you actually feel your body or no? What does it feel like? And when today I noticed myself getting agitated over a particular piece of work that I was not satisfied with the standard of, because I already know that this is a failure mode of mine, I already said, okay, we're not going to act based on this. But number two, I watched how it came and how it happens. And it's a familiar pattern. Okay. There's a certain kinds of a control freakness feeling about it. Okay. Because we're trying to get to the feeling, how it actually feels like. So what does control freakness feel like? Right. So there's a tightness that comes almost like you feel like you're losing grip of something. And there's a tightness that I feel, right? And I'm like, oh my God, this is not up to standard, or this should not be this way, or I shouldn't have to explain this thing to you, or whatever it is I'm control freaking about. When I stop and watch it, there is a tightness around the head, neck area, perhaps the shoulder. There is a shallowness of breathing. Okay. When I'm control freaking, I'm not going while I'm control freaking. No. When I'm control freaking and saying, oh my God, I got this deadline. This thing is not up to standard. How can I submit this thing this way? Or whatever it is that's going on that day, that this particular failure mode, this particular weakness of mine shows up, that tightness comes along with a shallow breathing. Okay. And today what happened is it was almost like I was split in two. Oh yes, he said it, and then Ike said he his soul ascended into the seventh dimension. No, but basically I was watching this tightness. I was watching this shallowness of breathing. I was watching this thing, this control freakness, this particular weakness, this particular oversensitivity to certain standards that causes me to then behaviorally do things that might screw things up, right? I was watching it happen. I was kind of powerless over it other than to just watch it pass and to know that I should watch out for that particular thing. Whenever I see it, don't act based on it. That is the failure mode. That is the failure mode. That is the screw coming out of the stud wall. And it's okay that the screw comes out of the stud wall, but it is not okay for you to pretend like it is not, that you don't have it. It is not okay for you to not recognize it. It is not okay for you to not be familiar with your particular weakness, because when you're not familiar and can embrace and be one with your weakness, you offshore it to other people. You make other people deal with your weaknesses. Isn't that right, Nicer? When you don't know how the shelf is actually going to break, and you don't tell people, hey, you can't put more than 200 pounds because the weakest link here is the screw on the wall. So, okay, you see that? Okay, if you push down over here on this thing, it's going to break. All right. Maybe I can just keep on doodling here on the screen while I talk. But if you don't tell people that, then you're putting the responsibility of this thing breaking on someone else. It's going to break, it's going to fall on someone else. The same thing happens. You're going to break and fall on someone else. You're going to freak out and start yelling or doing something stupid. You're going to make a bad decision. You're going to make a rash decision. You're going to do something stupid because you did not watch out for the particular failure mode, your particular weakest link. You don't know how it works. It caught up on you unaware. Hence, we're saying be aware. Isn't that right? Hence, we're saying be aware. So let me see if I can get a side view of that bracket on that shelf, just so we know what we're talking about. So you got a shelf like this. Let's say you got some studs over here. This is a wall, right? This is a wall. Then you got some screws over here. Zzz, zzz. And you stand over here. I'm saying, hey, the screws are gonna pull out. That's the failure mode of that particular structure, let's say. That's the place that is going to go down first, let's say. And that in understanding of, and in the world of design, in the world that you expect to be the case in the technological world, in the scientific world, in the world where, hey, if you give me a piece of equipment and you haven't tested it and you don't know how it works, I expect that you know this. I expect that you're able to tell me exactly how this thing fails. I expect that you've done crash tests on your cars. I expect that you know the crumple zones. I expect that you're able to tell me the way this thing will lose, function, malfunction, fail, break. So we owe it to ourselves that we should know how we fail and break. You could be delusional and say you don't fail and break. Now, that kind of asshole is a different type of person altogether. We're not interested in that particular kind of idiot. But you can also be delusional in the sense that you're only focusing on your strengths and you're trying to maximize your strength. So the strength over here is going to be, let's say, let's label this thing again. So let's just say this is the screw, right? So the bracket, you got pretty strong brackets. The brackets are not going to buckle. Pretty good bracket. You got pretty good shelving. Say we got 200 pounds here. This is some plywood. You got some pretty good wood there. The wood is not going to fail, right? So you focus on your wood, if you will, and you focus on your bracket and you focus on your strengths. Maybe your strength is being organized, but your weakness is procrastination. That's me, for example. My strength is organization, and I can focus and focus and focus on that. But until I deal with one of my weaknesses, which is procrastination, I just talked about another one, which I experienced today. I talked about the feeling of noticing exactly what that control freakness feels like, what control freakness feels like, and the tightening of the chest that comes along with it, the shallowness of the breathing that comes along with it. That way I can check that particular gauge on the dashboard. I'm like, uh-oh, the control freak bar is going up. What are the indicators of the control freak bar? It's the feelings I just mentioned, right? That the breathing is shallow and that these things are happening is 100% an indicator to me that there is some kind of failure happening in the system. There's some kind of loss of control happening in the system. That's what I was saying. If, on the other hand, your strength is organization and you're focusing on your strength, and then but you don't focus on the weakness, the procrastination, you're gonna make other people have to deal with the weakness, just like you make other people have to deal with the broken shelf because you did not design your shelf properly, you did not understand its weakest link, you did not mitigate the weakness of the screws by adding more screws, by putting more brackets. Okay? Now, what does procrastination feel like though? Now, Nicer has a very good question here. Nicer has a very good question. Says, how do you snap out of it? Does anyone care to discuss that? Now, it might sound trivial for me to say this in the sense that maybe you expect that somebody would say this, but you don't snap out of it. But there's something that you do, and I can describe it in the way I was describing what freaking out feels like. Can you guess what exactly it is? Let me put it this way. When today I was freaking out over some kind of control freak type stuff, which I know is one of my weaknesses, being a control freak, there is a big difference between freaking out and being a control freak and watching yourself freak out and being a control freak. Would that be right, Nicer? Would that be right? Anyone in the chat? Is there a difference between me being able to observe up to the level where I could say control freakness involves tightness? And when I say tightness and tightness of the chest and tightness in the neck and the head area, you guys can understand me that such feelings of tension or maybe anxiety or whatever it may be come along with those particular sensations. And I talk about the shallowness of breath and watching freak out happen and control freakness happen. There's a big difference between that and just freaking out unconsciously. Neither of them is snapping out of it, but where would you rather be? Would you rather be blind, number one, or would you rather watch yourself freak out as a start, number two? Can I get a 1 or a 2 on that, right? That's a simple one. Would you rather blindly freak out, or at least number two, watch yourself freak out and notice in your body the things that are happening that are involved with this freaking out? Because that is the fundamental difference, to answer your question, Nicer. That is how you snap out of it. You snap out of it by knowing and watching it. Hence, this whole idea of knowing and watching your weaknesses, it's not just something that you do abstractly on a piece of paper when you sit down, have a cocktail, and talk about your weaknesses. No, it's about knowing that freak out means tightness of chest, shallowness of breath. It means that there's a certain kind of numbness on the side of your face, maybe. Now, I noticed all kinds of sensations today that are associated with this thing, right? And when you know there is a side of you, that's the side of you that you're now relying on, okay? When you know there is a side of you that is observing, that has the opportunity not to be completely taken for the ride. When you can watch it happen, there is a side of you that has the opportunity not to be completely taken for the ride. That is what snapping out of it is like. That is what snapping out of it is. It is observation. Perception is what frees you from the freak out. Perceiving the freak out as opposed to being blind and not perceiving the freak out. So, I was thinking about that, amongst other things, and ways in which we can be more mindful designers of our own lives by understanding the different ways in which we fail. And there are not going to be too many of them. See, that's the beauty of this journey here, ladies and gentlemen. The beauty of this is that we're going to map out and design and understand the kinds of load and stress that we can take and where we're going to start to break. The places where we break over and over again, repeatedly, assuredly, consistently. If we can know these, then there are not many things that we have to keep in mind in terms of our weaknesses and in terms of how they arise. Now, and to Nicer's point about snapping out of it too, it is not a question that Now that I've noticed what freak out feels like, is it going to stop? No. You see, that's the funny thing about, and it may be slightly frustrating also. Just because you know where your freak out is, where your crazy is, doesn't mean it'll stop. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this. It is crazy to think it should stop. Well, why? Because it's almost like saying, well, something should be infinitely strong, like the screws should not come out of the wall, right? That the legs of the table should never buckle, okay? Or that the table should never be put in a situation of stress. No, the table has to be used, so it's going to be in a situation of stress. And if you overstress it, or it'll feel that load when it's approaching its maximum load, right? When it's reaching its maximum load of 500 pounds, it will feel just like you feel. It will feel the heat. It will feel freaking out. It will feel tightness and whatever the equivalent of shortness of breath is on a table leg. That's what the table leg is going to feel. And when you are also under stress because you're not some bum sitting down just eating Cheetos, you're actually doing things in the world. Hence, you're carrying load. And for your weak spots not to feel the load would be crazy. So the freak out would happen. It's like when you work out or when you play a sport and when you start using a muscle for the first time. Anyone have experienced this, right? We've all experienced this, right? There's a certain kind of maybe a pain that you're not used to, right? And you think you're bothered with it, but then later on you're like, oh, it's that pain when I do this particular move in jujitsu, and it's fine, right? It'll go away. It's that particular kind of stress, this kind of a strain. But in our physical lives, including in our bodies and including our shelves, we know the failure modes. We understand the weak spots and what have you. But then, in the areas of our life where things really matter, when it comes to our psychic strength, the strength of our will, the strength of our character, where are our flaws? Which one of the seven deadly sins are we particularly susceptible to? In those areas, we tend to be very poor designers, and very poor in the understanding of how we actually break. And we have stigma about breaking there. We have stigma about breaking. We think we should be infinitely strong Superman in the psychic consciousness, will, mind realm. And it's silly. The same way you train your muscles, you should train your mind as well. The same way you observe how far you can push it and what the failure mode of your wrist is, whether you're doing arm wrestling or just doing dumbbells. We all know the weak spots physically, right? The weak spots in our stance, the weak spots in our sitting posture, the weak spots in our sleeping positions, even. So, I wanted this to be a quick one. MISC Fridays, okay? Master Your Subjective Consciousness Fridays, where I'm just going to come in for less than an hour or so, and we're going to, we're going to drop our writing pad. That's the first thing we do. We're going to talk about this idea of noticing things. Noticing things. This idea of our subjective consciousness, this area of our lives where we're poor designers, we're poor exercisers. We're poor students of this part of our life. And then we make ourselves and others suffer the consequences. And if I were to give a broad overview of what this aspect of the channel is about, it's about observing yourself so that you have a side of yourself that is free from completely and totally being taken along for the ride of your anger, the ride of your joy, the ride of your sadness or your sorrow or your happiness, the ride of your freaking out, the ride of your being triggered in any way, good or bad. To observe yourself so that there is a side of yourself that is not going to be taken for the ride. That is where all the power, all the will, all the intention comes from. That is the opportunity for you to do differently other than what the ride wants you to do. I described a ride of freaking out earlier, right? I was like, I'm freaking out because I'm a control freak over some particular thing that I'm reviewing, right? And because I know this about myself, I knew that it's a particular weakness of mine. I walked into the meeting with that notion in mind. And then I was watching myself freak out, watching myself get overly sensitive about certain things. But I was able to because I was observing it in a real time fashion, observing my actual chest tighten up over something someone else said about some standard which is not being met right now or something that they didn't do correctly. I was able to watch that, and that gave me space to not act on that and not be lost in that. In other words, it gives me space to be conscious. Again, observing yourself so that you can at least partially get over yourself is what the mastery of subjective consciousness is all about. And today we're talking about weakness. We borrowed a term from mechanical engineering there, you know, failure modes. Everything has a failure mode. Failure mode is the mode by which things break, the way in which things fail. And we all fail and have shortcomings of various kinds. Promises that we have failed to keep to ourselves and to others. Things that we're supposed to have done a long time ago, but procrastinated. Potential within us that we know we're not reaching. Weaknesses that we know we do have. Some will tell you, don't look at your weaknesses, focus on your strengths. But that in and of itself is a weakness because the real strong focus on their weak spots and they know exactly where it is. They know the chink in their armor. They're not going to go to battle not knowing the chink in their armor, not knowing where the weakest link is, because that's 100% irresponsible. So you focus on the understanding of that. And then you observe how it actually happens so that you can avoid, ladies and gentlemen, being taken for the ride. Shout out to Gail in the building. As she says, please like the video, share, subscribe. All right. And as I said, wanted to keep this one a quick one. So that is all for today. What do you think about this idea of focusing on our failure modes, focusing on our weaknesses? We all fail in a particular mode, in a particular pattern. Okay. There's not 1,000 different ways that you fail. You don't have 1,000 different weaknesses. It's the same set of things that are happening over and over again. Like for the shelf we talked about, it's that screw every time. All those shelves that are out there, as long as they're designed this way, well then that screw is going to pull out. That's what always happens. So, what is your equivalent of that screw? Indeed, ladies and gentlemen. So leave your comments below, leave your thoughts below. What are your thoughts about mapping out your weaknesses, observing your weaknesses so that you can have space, you can have room not to be completely caught up in the ride, so that you can make some autonomous decisions, so that you can actually overcome this everyday granular battle of the wheels, right? The lower wheels trying to control you. And maybe you have some higher wheels, some higher powers of observation, which you can bring to bear by focusing on your weaknesses and how they manifest themselves so that you can overcome. Peace.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what was behind the curtain, the face of evil lurking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make me get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, run, come, make me get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest.